So, hi, my name is Ryan, and I'm going to be discussing how current federal law violates the rights of gay Americans. Now, the primary piece of legislation I'm going to be looking at is the Defense of Marriage Act, which is an act signed into law in 1996 by President Clinton, which essentially restricts marriage to being legally defined as being between one man and one woman, and it allows states. It explicitly states that no state, territory, or possession of the United States or Indian tribe shall be required to give effect to any public act, record, or judicial proceeding of any other state, territory, possession, or tribe respecting a relationship between persons of the same sex that is treated as marriage. Pretty much letting states do what they will with gay marriage. And I'm going to be showing how this violates the rights of Americans through how DOMA violates the 14th Amendment rights of American citizens, how it ties the hands of the federal government in regards to recognizing marriage, and how this allows states to opt out of the full faith and credit clause of the Constitution, which I'll define later. Starting off, the 14th Amendment is often known as the Equal Rights Amendment or Equal Protection Amendment. And the 14th Amendment promises that each state provides equal protection under the law to all people within its jurisdiction. And protections can include everything from your standard constitutional rights, right to a jury, trial by jury, and your rights to not be raided by the police at any time without probable cause. But it also includes protections in terms of marriage rights, your rights to file your taxes as a couple. Adoption rights, your rights to visit family members in the ICU, anything that is that couples can do that is not necessarily granted to an individual. Now, DOMA, by stating that no states shall be required to recognize this relationship, is essentially allowing states to opt out of giving citizens their full constitutional rights. The 14th Amendment is designed to extend to all Americans. And now there's this law that was signed into place, pretty much letting states pick and choose whether or not they grant citizens constitutional rights. Now, this is all, so far I've only mentioned things happening at the state level. And one of the questions that arises is, why doesn't the federal government come in and change marriage from being a state entity to being a federal entity, therefore rising it out of the reach? But the problem is that DOMA has the final section of DOMA applies to the federal government, stating that the federal government must define marriage as being between one man and one woman. Any law that pertains to marriage or spousal rights must use this definition, which pretty much means that the federal government cannot come in and force states to recognize same-sex marriages, nor can they recognize same-sex marriages on their own. Which pretty much ties the federal government's hands and prevents them from essentially doing anything about this short of fully repealing DOMA. And one of the final points is another area where DOMA impedes the constitutional rights of citizens through the full faith and credit clause of the Constitution, which is the clause that requires states to recognize legislative acts, public records, and judicial decisions of other states. This is the same clause that lets you get married in California, move to Nevada, and still call yourself a couple without having to remarry in Nevada. Now, this clause is being overridden by DOMA by, again, letting states essentially do what they want with gay marriage, which allows for states like New York, which have fully legalized same-sex marriage, to fully legalize same-sex marriage, and it also allows New Jersey to recognize that marriage, but it allows for states like Pennsylvania to not recognize that marriage. It allows for it to be essentially, it allows these marriages to be recognized in varying extents throughout our so-called United States. So essentially, the states are not united on the recognition of same-sex marriage, which goes in direct violation of the full faith and credit clause of the Constitution. Now, there is also some, the reason that this is such a big issue is because there are still groups out there who believe that DOMA is in fact a perfectly legitimate, perfectly legal, and necessary law. And one of the major reasons why DOMA is like at the center of all of this is because from the very minute it was signed into law, it has been debated among individuals and challenged in the courts. But again, my main point is just that federal law, in this case specifically DOMA, violates the rights of gay Americans.
All right, your claim, Ryan, is stated pretty early. Basically, you use the claim as your attention device. That DOMA is the main focus becomes a little bit clearer as you get further into the speech. And I actually thought that your exit line was a clearer statement of what the proposition is than what you had at the beginning. You did lay out the secondary points pretty clearly, although that second point is a little awkward in its phrasing, and I'm not exactly sure what it ends up meaning. The first and the third points were a lot clearer. During the speech, you did signpost pretty clearly, so we knew where you were at any particular point. On the evidence, I think you need a lot more information. There's no legal authority that is giving the interpretation that you're talking about. The challenges that have been made to DOMA, I'm sure, are supported by a lot of legal scholars who've talked about those issues and interpretations of, for instance, the 14th Amendment, but we're not getting any reference to those. We just get some hypothetical examples as illustrations, and the reasoning is not necessarily problematic, but without the evidence, it's not as convincing as it needs to be. I think you do a pretty good job speaking to the audience for the most part, and like I said at the end of the speech, I thought you had a clear exit line that told us exactly what the point of the presentation was. All right.